Let's just go over this. I mean, the shocking turn of events today, the reversal, the overturning of the acquittal, the adding of a year to your brother's prison term. How did you find out about this, number one?
We were made aware Tuesday evening, Toronto time, and we've been obviously trying to understand a little bit more of the reason and rationale for the decision, and obviously protect Neil and manage Neil effectively, and just what our next steps and the rights are at this point.
Okay, so we'll talk about all of those things in a little bit more detail. You've known since Tuesday, though. We just got the word or overnight breaking this morning, so you had some time to process it. But the initial reaction after the acquittal in the summer overturned now, what was your first reaction to the news?
We were stunned. We obviously have been managing this case over the last several months. We knew that the appeal was going through to the Supreme Court, and we were confident that, given the decision by the High Court, that they would uphold that decision and Neil would be returning home in the next coming weeks, not continuing to fight on. So it just came completely out of left field, and I think a little bit more disappointing was the panel in our knowledge was only named on Monday morning, yet they rendered a decision by Wednesday morning Jakarta time, and it just it's astounding that this has happened at such a high level in the judicial system. Our
reporter who's been covering this today, Jack Hewson, made that very point. This hastily assembled panel with very little time to go through the evidence. It's complicated evidence, and it's very questionable evidence in your brother's case, and rendering this decision so quickly thereafter, overturning the conviction, adding a year to the sentence. Have you any insight into why it's done what it's done?
No, that's kind of the frustrating piece, and I think that's something that we'll have to peel back over the next several days and weeks as we get into this more. The only communique we have out of the Supreme Court was that they had granted the appeal to the prosecutor and that Neil was to be returned to prison. So to your point, you look at the evidence in this case, it was very, very one-sided as far as what the defense was able to provide in terms of medical reports and interviews and expert witnesses versus, merely an allegation and some, purported tests that the prosecutor presented. So, we do know this information was very technical. It was very medical in nature. I've seen some of it. I'm just astounded that, within 48 hours, the Supreme Court was able to, review the case and make a decision, and I'm, quite leery of that whole process.
Have you spoken to Neil yet, Guy?
Yeah, we've been in touch since the get-go. Neil was out of Jakarta at the time of the ruling, and we've kind of talked it through how this process would look like. Obviously, managing Neil's kind of mental state a little bit, and the prospect of being returned to custody and to prison for a period of time, and trying to get an understanding of what our next steps are and a judicial review, which will be the next phase for ourselves.
You mentioned the mental state. We heard that clip when he spoke to the Fifth Estate, such hope at being able to return home. What is the mental state at now learning he has to go back?
He flat out said, I just can't go back to jail. I just can't do it. And, unfortunately, there are very limited options available to us at this point. You could tell, Neil was obviously elated to be released and to have his freedom, even though he couldn't leave the country. That's changed somewhat after the Christmas holidays and after the New Year, when we knew we would start getting to a point that a decision would come down. But again, we were very, very confident. You're a little bit, concerned just given some of the issues we've had with the whole judicial process overall, and you're a little bit leery on what's going to happen. So his state had changed somewhat, but obviously this just set him in a completely different direction.
So when you say he couldn't leave the country, we know a condition. His passport was revoked, so he was not allowed to leave the country. But there is question about where he is now and the process of surrendering. Can you take us through that, whether he will indeed surrender or what the thinking is now?
Yeah, so he obviously is within Indonesia. He was visiting an area. We have been in touch with Canadian consular officials. They are handling the process from that perspective to keep Neil safe and to make sure it's done as practically as possible. He is with them currently as we speak, and he is in transit back to Jakarta.
No chance that he will not turn himself in?
He is with consular officials, and he's moving back to Jakarta. That's all I'll say at this point.
Okay. You mentioned the judicial review. That's the next step, we understand, within the court process, but it's the same court. It's the same evidence that they will be reviewing. So it seems doubtful that there will be any other conclusion other than the one that they have just reached this week. So that Must be discouraging. I'm wondering where the Canadian government comes in. We'll take a look together at the screen. Stéphane Dion, the Foreign Affairs Minister, issuing what seemed to be a very strongly worded statement in terms of diplomatic language, talking about how the government is dismayed and shocked, talking about grave irregularities that have occurred through these proceedings and promising to press this matter at the highest levels. Have you talked to Minister Dion or anyone at the government? What are the next steps with Canada?
Yeah, I have not spoken directly with Minister Dion, but I do appreciate the statement that he's made. I agree with you. It's the strongest statement that Canada's made in this case to date. I was just about an hour ago speaking with our local MP. She's setting up meetings for myself with the Parliamentary Secretary of Consular Services and the Department of Foreign Affairs to really understand where we can go from next, or where we go to next. Because I really do believe that, the Canadian government needs to start to push this matter forward, and I think they walk a very fine line. It is a sovereign country, and you've got to abide by their judicial system and the way the process works there. But ultimately, you've got to look at how the entire process is kind of played out, and the lack of transparency and the lack of admission of some of the evidence, and really the total lack of evidence that they've convicted Neil with.
Guy, as always, I appreciate your time and your thoughts on this. We'll continue to watch the developments. Thank you for this morning.
Thanks, Heather.